Perfect. Cool. Howdy, y'all. Good evening. My name is Nick Spiller. Thank you for coming to the Student Ventures interview series. This is our second part in a three-part series where I'm interviewing entrepreneurs from the Austin community, kind of at the intersection of the liberal arts. And tonight we're focusing on entrepreneurship abroad, and we have our local expert on that, Kevin Coim. Kevin is the founder and CEO of Tech Ranch Austin. We'll probably talk a little bit about that in a bit. And overall, he's just a big community builder here in town. I'm not going to go too far into your background. I was actually going to be the first question I'd ask is you just give us kind of a concise explanation of how you got to where you are today, and then we'll dig into the entrepreneurship abroad. Can you all hear me? Are you good back there? Yeah. Would you do us a favor, shut the doors so it sound stays? Cool. So yeah, Kevin, why don't you give us a little background on yourself and how you ended up here?
Sounds great. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Like I was saying informally earlier, I actually love to be here at UT. I'm a student, or I'm an alumni from UT. I have an electrical engineering degree, undergrad degree from here, from many years ago. And I graduated in '86, I actually graduated in '90, got here in '86. Make a long story short, I got an electrical engineering degree at UT. I actually, straight out of college, worked with this guy named Steve Jobs. You've heard of a company called Next?
Heard of him.
Yeah, so there's a company, he got fired from Apple. He started a company called Next, and I came straight out of the seats that you guys were in, actually a building that was that direction.
These seats are probably a little nicer than the ones
I was going to say,
we were
back in olden times, everyone's going to make fun of me for my age.
Not too long ago.
I actually got to work for him, and I fell in love with this idea that technology could change the world, right? And and it kind of really warped me in the way that the first job out of college, I didn't know that Steve Jobs was an asshole because he was like a great guy. I just thought this is what work looked like, and I fell in love with the whole idea of we could change the world with technology. We're going to do it right now, and 3.5 years later, I'm like, okay, what do I do next? And so I went to another startup after that for about a year, and then decided that in 1994 is when I started my first company. I've had a number of successful startup companies. I'm not a crazy billionaire type or anything like that, but a number of small companies that are always pioneering technology, always like doing stuff on the bleeding edge of technology. One area was on how to connect to databases. One area was on computers that could read emotion. One area was on e-commerce. One was all sorts of other stuff, using Linux as a product, and really eclectic technology background. The main idea is just kind of being this pioneer to do impact for our community, right, is the one thread. Started Tech Ranch I actually started this part of my career about 12 years ago. I had a friend that had this tragedy happen. A friend of mine took her own life, and it really kind of deeply affected me, and I said I have to really go back to this idea of doing something to really change the world, not just kinda. And I guess this is what ties into tonight's topic is, so my first dollars earned from my first startup 21 years ago or so were pesos in Mexico. And I actually remembered that as I was, and I'll tell you more as we get into it, but part of what happened was after this tragedy happened, I said, okay, I ought to go do something different to really make an impact. And the whole reason I was actually having part of the conversation with you guys earlier is, I realized I couldn't get to the point that I could actually change the world myself. So how could I actually help as many of y'all create entrepreneurial startups that actually had impact on the world? And so that's why Tech Ranch was started, and that's why I founded Tech Ranch. I don't know, I can keep on. Yeah, I can do. You'll have to tell me.
Yeah, so it's just, I think recently you've, I'm not sure exactly the time frame, but you've established entrepreneur networks in foreign countries. Chile is the one that I do know about, which is an impressive. Startup Chile is a really interesting program, but also I think Singapore, Mexico, and China. Is who I saw
Yeah,
there?
so the ones that I'm on the point of the spear on are Mexico, Chile, obviously in the United States. We've done a lot of activity in Singapore. Actually, one of my business partners just came from 2 weeks of Hong Kong, India, Japan, Korea, and China. And then, he spends about a week every 4 to 6 weeks in Asia.
Got it.
And where I've been more focused on the Americas and a little bit on Europe.
Yeah. Okay, so just describe those engagements. Are you doing that on your own accord, or did the government hire you to do it, or how does?
Well, so initially, kind of what happened was, with the reason of going to Chile was I had this tragedy I talked about earlier, and it's really kind of funny. I was like, I left the last startup I'd been at, and ended up, I was like, okay, I got to go do something right now. I tried to actually get it started here. And most people in Austin are like, hey, that's that guy that's been doing startups all this time. Why are you doing something different? It doesn't make sense. And so, make a long story short, the then director of the LBJ Library, the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library that you guys know right over here, was one of my advisors. And she said, hey, if you're serious about this vision, you should go take it to Chile. Oh, by the way, there's a senator. Oh, by the way, there's this presidential hopeful. I'm like, what? And so, but make a long story short, actually, there's a synchronous story about that too. I actually happened to be invited to go to Chile that morning, and she didn't know. And kind of just by fate, I'm like, one of my friends who knew me from high school said, you should come down here because we know that you're upset about this situation that happened earlier. And so I ended up, I was like, okay, this is a sign from God or something. I'm going to go to Chile. So the first 1,000 people that were to go through any kind of entrepreneurship program were in Chile. I did fund that out of my own pocket. I had been lucky to have some startup success up to that point, and kind of the idea was like, okay, I'm just going to go. And some of the, if y'all have heard of that program you mentioned earlier, Startup Chile, some of the godfathers of that program, actually, or not that program, but the godfathers of the Chilean market, technology entrepreneurship market, actually were in my programs back in 2003, and so. So that's kind of how things got started. It kind of started out of crisis.
Yeah. So you went there on your own accord and started these programs to help?
Yeah, I mean, I ended up, there was a senator that I actually essentially went to and said, hey, I'm God's gift to entrepreneurship. Why don't you pay attention to me? It was very obnoxious in a way, but I had this tragedy happen, and sometimes not thinking straight can be actually a valuable tool.
It's good news.
Yeah. And and sometimes naivete is a really valuable asset. You guys have a really valuable asset in that you're, for the most part, you're really young and you don't know what the world looks like. And actually, in this case for me, although it was a pain in the butt at times, it actually was really valuable as well.
What about China and Mexico? How'd that come about?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we delayed this a week was last week was in Guanajuato, Mexico. Guanajuato is kind of the state in the middle of Mexico. It's actually really interesting. Truth be told, a lot of the stuff in China, I'll actually just mention that really quick. I don't know China. I've been to China, but I've never done business really in China. My business partner really is the expert there, and he's leveraging a lot of our same models and taking a lot of our startups here to there. But in Mexico, since my first dollars earned were pesos in Mexico, I kind of feel very, very comfortable there. And so this last week, part of what we were looking at is we had 12 different meetings with all sorts of different groups, universities, corporations, entrepreneurs, science parks, technology, guys that have technologies that the world's never seen before. The exciting thing about it is it's some of the biggest growth areas in the world are not here, not in this country. And so one of the ideas of part of the message that I think is behind this idea of, why even consider going international is it's a greenfield there. BMW just announced in Guanajuato that they're about to invest $1 billion in the next BMW plant is going to be there, not in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You answered my next question. That was literally my next question.
Uh-oh.
Which is fine, but we'll dig a little deeper. So, what countries are the greenest fields?
I'm not going to say that I'm any expert at knowing where the markets are, but obviously the ones that I personally have seen is Mexico is exploding, Chile has been exploding. We read about Brazil, we read about China, but it's a lot of the developing nations are really developing fast and furious. Mexico is a good example, and it's the one I'll point to the most because it's the one I know best. But it's like all the people that might have been at the bottom of the pyramid are very hungry and are actually creating this activity, and it's palatable. You can actually see, like when I was just driving down this one place between León and Celaya, you could actually just see all the building happening.
Have you heard of the technology leapfrog concept?
Yeah, certainly the idea of like instead of putting copper lines in the ground for phones like we have here, you're hopping straight to mobile, cellular phones and stuff like that. Lots of different examples of that.
Skip a step. That's interesting concept. Cool. So out of these, Mexico, Chile, even Singapore, China, the ones you've interacted, have any of them been more receptive or least receptive of the kind of the idea of entrepreneurship culturally?
I think that a lot of times people say, the United States has like a certain thing about entrepreneurship that we've figured out. I do think it comes kind of from our pioneer spirit of our history. But there's not one place on the planet that doesn't have some level of entrepreneurship. To my eyes, the thing, like you can see the guys that are just doing stuff on the side of the road in Mexico, it looks extremely entrepreneurial. Now, they haven't had the benefit in that country of some of the legal frameworks that we have in this country, and the legal frameworks that reinforce certain types of trust. Like there's something that you can actually have trust at distance in the United States because of our legal frameworks that just haven't really emerged to the same level of potency of other countries, in other countries. That being said, there's not one place on the planet that I wouldn't think that I couldn't get something started. And I actually think that for you guys as well, it's a matter of just identifying, like it was really valuable for my first experience of working with entrepreneurs to actually be in Chile versus here, because it forced me to think with a different set of eyes.
So you could start something anywhere. All right, so let's here's a question. Say right now we're gonna pitch in and we're gonna buy you a random plane ticket to a random country, and your job, you bring nothing with you, clothes on your back, we're taking your wallet, and you get one thing to take with you, one choice, and your goal is to start a business, and we're gonna come back 30 days later and we're gonna want to work for your business. What would you bring?
My cell phone, if that's what you mean. Like, yeah, by far. What
if there's what if there's no service?
That'd be hard.
That's a risk. I think the cell phone's the easy one, but like there's a risk. There's a lot of places, a lot of countries we could drop you off in that wouldn't.
The main thing is like if you can get some sense of the culture in a soft way. It was a little bit difficult when I went to Chile that first time. I remember I was presenting this idea of entrepreneurship, and I'm talking about like, you have not tasted American freedom until you've actually been an entrepreneur. Like in this country, I don't think if I was to get up on my soapbox for a little bit, I actually really believe that. And I was talking about this in the northern part of Chile, in a part called Arica, which is the northernmost city. And the funny thing about it is this happens to historically be a part that's historically very communist. I understood all the Spanish that was being spoken to me, but I didn't understand the concept. I was blind to what they were actually talking about. And it's because people were, there's a group of guys in this one talk that were yelling at me in Spanish, which I understood their words, but I didn't understand their concepts. And it just was like this. They were like, you gringo imperialist, what the hell are you doing in our country, blah, blah, blah. Now, the thing that was valuable about that, and this might be the one thing I'd actually take, is my dad was in the Peace Corps before I was born. He was in the Peace Corps in Brazil. And I remember growing up as a kid that my dad even though I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and I grew up in a very normal kind of situation, I guess, in a lot of ways. But he would actually talk about, since he was involved in the Peace Corps, he would actually interact with Peace Corps volunteers that were going to Korea and Peace Corps volunteers that were going to Brazil. And I remember having the experience of having food from both those cultures all the time and hearing different languages and having it be very natural. It wasn't a unique thing. It wasn't different. It wasn't odd. But that set of experiences probably enabled me more than anything else. If you go to a foreign country, there's a very good chance you're going to go through culture shock. It's very natural. It happened to me in Mexico. It's happened to me in Chile. I remember there was some difficult times on one of my vacations in Europe that, I'm like, why the hell are they doing it like that? But knowing that there's multiple ways of looking at the world, that's one of the gifts my dad gave to me. And actually, I think it came from his Peace Corps standpoint. So that's the thing. Just know that, one of the best things about you guys considering going to another country or maybe being from another country is just having a different framework of thought, that you're not blinded by, well, that's the way we do things in the United States, right? There are too many people in this country, that are just sort of totally blinded by this idea that the U.S. has the best way of doing everything and anything.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate because, eating a lot of Korean food, eating a lot of Brazilian food, hearing these other languages, being in a really different environment like that was valuable.
So maybe like an intro to whatever country you're sending me to book.
Yeah, or even just like it might even be just the way you look at the cultural ways that people do stuff. As an example, at the dinner table in Chile, if you were to pull out a toothpick and use it in your teeth, it's one of the biggest insults. And it's actually insulting to the whole restaurant. How would you know that? You have to really just sort of watch. At the beginning, another thing that's unique about Chile is if you're working in an office, right when you walk into the office, you go walk around and shake everyone's hand, or if it's a woman, you give her a kiss on the side of the cheek, and you do it with everybody. Like if this was an office here, and I just walked in, I would have roughly 25 people that I need to shake their hand or give a kiss to, just like an informal kiss on the side of the cheek kind of thing. And if you don't do that, if you leave out someone in the process of doing that, it's actually a real big insult. The frickin' gringo doesn't like me, blah 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 blah, and then it can create all sorts of problems. It's just because you didn't see it, you didn't think about it. I didn't think about that. I'm lucky in that I had a couple different people teach me that. I'll give you an example of what happened when I was in Mexico in '94. So Americans, we like to get things done. And actually even saying the word American, by the way, for people that live on this continent or in South America, you should know in some ways is a little bit of an insult, right? Because we're in the United States of America, but the whole continent considers itself Americans. Like if you go to Mexico and you say you're American, well, it's actually you're kind of insulting people in Mexico. Now they understand that we don't necessarily know what to call ourselves because we're from the United States, and I don't know what the word would be even about that. So I call myself Texan, actually, usually, when I introduce myself. I don't call myself an American. But so I'm at a lunch table with this guy named Marco Cesar Gloria. He was my actually first customer. I was immediately wanting to get to the work that we're doing, right? It's like he was like, tranquilo, calm down. So Mexican lunches, at least in Guadalajara at the time, start at 2 o'clock. And it's very likely that if it's a formal lunch, it's going to go to 4 o'clock. But you don't have business to do. Let's get straight to it. The American wants to immediately say, let's get everything done, blah, 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 blah. That's an insult to the Mexican standard. And in fact, meals mean much more in Mexico. And the food is typically much higher class than what we normally might eat here. They take their time, and they're going to ask you about their family, and they're going to ask you about how things are going and what's happening with your kids or what's happening with your mom. stuff like that. The really weird thing about it is I thought that this was just really irritating behavior. That I'm like, hey, I've got something to do here, and I need to get this done. A very gringo mindset, a very American mindset. The thing that actually, Marco was the first person that said, one of the things you really got to wake up and realize is that as I'm asking you about your family, or as the Mexican businessman or businesswoman asks about your family, what they're trying to do is, how do you manage your affairs? Because how you take care of your family is how you're going to take care of our relationship in business. And, oh wait, you have no idea what's going on with your kids? Oh, you're probably going to neglect our relationship as well. And so at the very beginning, that whole first hour and a half of a 2-hour lunch is typically, even though it looks like we're trying to be nice with each other, and we're building this relational type of thing. A lot of what's going on for a sophisticated business person, a Mexican business person, is they're really trying to figure out, who are you? And then based on who you are, okay, now I know if I can trust you or not. And it's actually really interesting. And once Marco actually taught me that, it actually changed my life in a lot of ways. That was probably the first lesson I learned on the ground in Mexico.
So there's these cultural caveats you've got to pick up on.
Yeah, there's
Is there
nuances and everything.
Website for those, or how do you learn that?
I think you just have to watch. You have to just watch and realize. If you do it here in this country, right, you can see the difference between what is it to even be in Austin versus be in Dallas. Like when you really start to get sophisticated about this idea, you'll see the differences between certainly Austin to Georgetown. 30 minutes north of here, total different culture at some level. And as you kind of realize that, as you start looking for it, you'll see something totally different.
Does anybody have any interesting cultural caveats they're aware of, just so we can share with each other?
The one particular one I can think of, and this is probably a bit of a stereotype, but it is true. It's the exact opposite in Germany. Because, you say in Mexico they want to hear about your life and what's going on outside of just business. But in Germany, you go into a meeting with the intention of getting things done and then being really efficient with your time and then being done.
Yeah, that's a good example.
So, Germany and Mexico.
Yeah.
Inverses on that one. Anything else? I think these are so interesting.
Well, I'm from South America. I'm from Peru.
Oh yeah?
What you told is true. People try to create rapport and make a friendship before doing any type of business. And I think that the reason of that is because there's a lot of distrust in Latin American people of what other can do against you. So it's better to understand and be friends before doing some type of.
Yeah, the guys in Chile. Even though I showed up in 2003, we really didn't. There's a group of 4 guys that I didn't do any business with until 7 years later.
Okay.
And it's kind of funny because I was told that Chileans especially, really want to know who you are. Very much, that was my experience.
Yeah, well, particularly from Peru, if you ever go over there, every business meeting is, you have to eat something. Because culturally we have very good food and we eat a lot.
Sounds great.
Yeah, Peru and Mexico have I think some of the best cuisine in the world. Exactly. And now what's interesting though, with that mindset, one of the things that I've helped, we have entrepreneurs from 24 different countries that are at the Tech Ranch. Tech Ranch, we have a facility at 183 Mopac, up north just a little bit. 24 different countries are represented by entrepreneurs there. Part of what I have to teach Mexican entrepreneurs, they sit down at the table and they immediately start asking the other person, the American, about, especially if they're from the Northeast, you start asking about their family and they're like, what the hell? Let's get something done here. And so it goes both ways, right? It's actually a very interesting thing.
I thought it was very interesting you talked about the different cultures in different countries. I'm actually originally from France, but I immigrated to Miami when I was a kid, and then I moved to LA, Palo Alto, different parts of the US. I think even in the US there's different culture differences. Like in Miami you give the kiss on the cheek, like you said. And then in Palo Alto, it's all like different mentalities and like the way people act and deal with like business and just like every aspect of life.
You know, an example that comes to mind is you talk about in the Bay Area, right, out in Palo Alto or out in Silicon Valley. I one time opened the door for a woman in Redwood City, California, and she said, "What, you think I can't actually get the door myself?" That's me being a Texas gentleman, right? And, you know, but there it was almost like some kind of slap about, wait, we're not, you can't treat me as an equal sex? I'm like, oh, he's crazy.
You should have said you open door for guys too.
Yeah, I mean, I would.
I open doors for everybody.
But if you know, because my grandparents on my mother's side, which actually lived in Georgetown when they were alive, they were very much like you know, just because, you know, you're not dating her doesn't mean you don't treat her like a lady. How could you not open that door, right? And that's Texas to California. It's kind of an interesting thing.
It's so incredible how these little things have a really big impact on your relationship with people. I've had two of these caveats pop into my mind since we've been talking about this. The first is from a movie, and I don't have any validation this is actually true. Have you guys seen Wolf of Wall Street? So when he has to hide Aunt Emma's money in the Swiss bank, he has the same deal where they're with this Swiss banker and they're sitting talking, and he's like trying to get down to business, and like it gets real awkward. The Swiss people get awkward because he's trying to get down to business, and they're like, "Oh, don't you know the custom? Like we have to chit chat for 15 minutes before we can talk about anything." And
yeah, wait. So just being a little bit sensitive about that,
Yeah.
Just being a little bit sensitive about that, it will go a long way. And having a little bit of language ability, you know, my Spanish has been good to crappy to good to crappy over the last 20-something years of doing business there. And, you know, just the fact that I actually try. Like last week, I was interacting with a number of different people, and they're all, like, most of their English is better than mine, right? You know, and I was like, but at least try some in Spanish because obviously we were in Mexico.
To contrast that in the movie, he says, "No, I'm not waiting 15 minutes. I've got $40 million I'm about to give you," and they got over it really quick. Which is he's by far like almost the antithesis of like how you should model your business persona. But anyways, the second one I wanted to bring up was my mom did business in China, and apparently it's a great sign of respect to really study like the business cards. When they hand you business cards, that you really actually have to look at it, and if you just take it and put it in your pocket, it's a sign of disrespect. But anyways,
I was taught a little bit of the Japanese method. You know, you hand the card like this with both hands, not like this, but with both hands, and then you consider it, and then you would always put it over your heart. You would never put it in the back pocket or something like that. You know, very simple type of thing. That sort of stuff, though, will go really far. It's actually interesting how that can actually make a difference if you just cue in to a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask one more question, and we'll open it up to y'all for any audience Q&A you have. So start thinking of your questions. We'll be out here in the next 20-25 minutes, depending on how long that goes. But so I've been personally thinking a lot lately on how I would scale my entrepreneurial network beyond Austin, particularly in foreign countries. So do you have any kind of pro tips on how someone could get started on that in a cost-effective way? It's like I can't really afford tickets to go and do the same thing I've done here in Austin and go to campfires all the time.
Yeah, there's probably like a couple different things that immediately come to mind. One of them is, one of the great things about UT is it's very diverse, right? Even in the people who spoke today, we know that we have some connections to France here, Peru, knowledge of Germany. You know, I don't know, I have no idea all the different countries that are represented here, but I mean, the network is right here in this room, and in a way that you should recognize that the person right next to you actually probably could actually connect you to the right person. It's by chance that I had that first customer in Mexico, just by luck. But now as I look back, I actually think that you can kind of create that kind of luck. You have to, you know, spin the globe, pick something, and then you can actually build stuff around that. I mean, you know, it's The world is much more open to doing business together, I think, than ever before, right? And if we think that the internet is going to actually create a more collaborative environment, like think about it. A few years from now, is the world going to be more collaborative or less collaborative? The people who know how to be more collaborative are actually going to be the ones that are going to excel, because the internet's just going to make it that way. And the people who want to try to be more isolated, it's actually going to, at some level, disrupt them, and they're not going to have. So I have found that by and far, just an open attitude a lot of times will open doors more than anything else. Now, the other side of it too is each one of you has a knowledge base that, even though you might be young, you should start featuring. I'm published on my blog, not a lot, but enough that if I call someone, they actually can figure out who I am. And I'm in enough different places, and anybody here could actually do that, right? You can kind of know, what are my hot buttons, what are not my hot buttons, how transparent am I in the way I work. That's another thing that the internet's actually making happen, and everyone here could actually do that. It's not something that is unique about my career. You guys are actually living in this age and are probably more adept than most of the people in my age that are actually doing this type of work. So that's another thing. The third thing that's really cool, and I kind of wish I had years ago, is there's all these programs around the world, like Startup Chile is a good example. With Startup Chile, the government of Chile actually give you $40,000. You have to apply, and you're selected. 100 entrepreneurs are selected out of like probably tens of thousands that apply. Or actually, I don't even know the numbers. I've been one of the judges for Startup Chile, but I don't know the numbers. And Chile is not the only country in the world that's doing this. I actually have heard many different countries around the world that are actually saying, hey, we want to create entrepreneurial blood in our country. It might take us a little bit of time to get there if we just try to train it in. So let's open up the world as an example, I'll talk about Chile because I know the most about it. Let's open up to say, hey, you guys that are entrepreneurs, show us your projects, and we'll give you $40,000. You have to sit here in Chile for 6 months. You have to go give some classes at the local university for younger people and stuff like that, or maybe at the high school level, and talk about what is it to be an American, or what is it to be, and they have different things. But the time commitment is actually very small compared to what you're getting. $40,000 to go live in another country and just work on your startup, that's pretty cool. And then in Chile's case, and I'm sure this happens in other countries as well, they'll help you actually find customers as well. There are programs all around the world that I know of, like one that was in Poland and other places, but Chile by far is the one that I know the most about. But if I was y'all's age, I'd totally take advantage of that and just, put together enough of the idea, get it started, and then apply to a number of different places, and then go figure out how you can actually get your seed funding. And the best part is they don't take any equity in your company. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
Why are they doing it then? It's like,
so in Chilean case, the historical, it's very unique that I actually ended up going down to Chile in 2003, right? It doesn't make sense. A lot of people are like, why does it happen? And part of the reason, initially for the first 5 years after my friend's death, I didn't tell that story, right? I was too sad and too ragefully angry about a friend of mine taking her own life. So most people were like, what the hell is this gringo doing in our country, right? In 2010, when the government of Chile actually started this program, part of what they recognized was, the number one force on the planet that creates these liberated economies is the power of entrepreneurship. More than capitalism. I make a distinction between capitalism and entrepreneurship. There's something about entrepreneurship that I think is very, very special. And yes, it is capitalist, but I think there's a different focus than just business, because you're actually taking these pioneering steps. So the government recognized that. The government of Chile recognized that and said, hey, we want to actually increase this. Now, the hero of the culture of Chile, at least in the way that I saw it, is the guy who got his PhD and then went to work at Citibank. And so how do you actually change that? How do you change that the star of the culture. It stops being the PhD, or in the United States, the sports star, or in other places. How do you actually change that? Well, you start importing a handful of people, and they said, hey, we're going to set aside $4 million, chunk it out at $40,000 increments, and we're going to get all these gringos. Now, it started out, I say gringos, that's a kind of a little bit of a derisive term, but I mean it tongue in cheek. We're going to get all these American entrepreneurs to come here. Now it's actually anyone around the world. Initially, it was American entrepreneurs, and through having them in Chile, there's going to be these meetups that, well, we have all these Americans here, and then a bunch of Chileans get here, and then some of the Chileans are actually learning from the Americans, hey, you're not afraid of taking risk. Normally, historically, Chileans are afraid of taking risk. You're not afraid to be a startup guy. Normally, historically, if your father started a PYME, which is a pequeño y mediano empresa, a small to medium-sized business, that meant, oh wait, you can't, you couldn't get a job, so your dad had to start a PYME. It actually was kind of a bad thing. But then Nick shows up in Chile, and wait, he actually wants to do that, and he's proud of it. He's got a T-shirt that's got his startup's name on it, and all that sort of stuff. It kind of changed the culture.
So it's an investment in culture.
Yeah, it's an investment in culture. Culture's, there's an expression that says culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yeah.
This is totally...
Peter Drucker, right?
Yeah, Drucker,
Yeah.
Exactly. This is an example of that. And so that's why you'll see a lot of different countries around the world are doing this, where they'll create landing pads. They'll create landing pads to say, hey, come on over. We'll actually give you seed capital and all that sort of stuff, as long as you keep your business here. Now, in Chile's case, they're actually saying, just give us 6 months.
Kind of reminds me of a little bit of what's been going on at UT the last 5 years. I think there's been a big investment in entrepreneurial culture on campus. And this program is a result of that.
Yeah, I know, it's great to see that, because I was telling a number of people earlier today, before we get started, that my scholarship advisor at UT was like, you want to start a company? You want to do what? You're wasting your time. Even my mother. I was an entrepreneur for 10 years before my mother actually stopped telling me, don't you want to just go get a job? I'm like, no, Mom, I don't. I want to go build something.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I open it up, I think a few of you may have heard me say this, but I was captured by entrepreneurship when I was actually the first time Bob Metcalf, our professor of innovation on campus, spoke in Austin after he was hired here, and he said, I was hired by the University of Texas to make our student entrepreneurs as supported and celebrated as our student athletes. And that was just something that really resonated with me, and that's kind of the thesis behind the culture we're growing here on campus and even in this room.
Well, and it's great to see. I mean, years ago it wasn't like that. The only people that really understood about why you're starting a company was the musician types that would be like, yeah, well, it's like you'd hear about the guy who got the mechanical engineering degree, got the job offer in Dallas, but because he wanted to stick around in Austin to play bass in a band, he actually gave up the offer in Dallas. That's crazy, but it makes total sense when you get caught into the culture here in Austin, right? And so some of my friends in the 90s, when I was actually, a 20-something-year-old entrepreneur, were artists and musicians because they understood.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions? Shingy?
Yeah, so you've talked a lot about, in the Americas and Asia and Europe, but what do you think of Africa? How do you think that Africa is developing their entrepreneurship?
I don't know enough about Africa. We actually have had people from 5 different countries ask me, hey, will you take TechRanch to Africa? And I'm like, very much interested in doing that. The difficulty I've had is, since most of my money has been spent on or invested in TechRanch here, and then I did the stuff in Mexico and then the stuff in Chile out of my own pocket, I've been looking for the right partners there. But we have some interesting stuff happening in 5 different countries. Kenya is one of the good examples. And Africa obviously is bigger than any other continents, so there's a massive opportunity there. And it's very, very, from what I've read, very diverse. I've never been to Africa, it is a greenfield opportunity, I think, in a lot of ways. And the main thing is just recognizing that just like the voice that you might hear in Texas is different than the voice you hear in Mexico, is different than the voice you hear in Chile. Like Mexican and Chilean culture, there's some relation, but there's a lot of differences. I wouldn't go to Africa assuming that it's going to be that there's one African culture. Other than that, from what I can tell, this whole leapfrog thing you were talking about earlier, I think Africa has the chance to really become a powerhouse in a way that is unexpected. I was actually talking with a former president of Mexico this last week, Vicente Fox, and actually one of his concerns for Latin America is they're very creative people across the Americas, but in some ways, concerned that Africa might actually be hungrier. And he actually was expressing, not just for Mexico, but for the Americas, that it's possible that if the Americas, and really he meant Latin America when he said it, doesn't actually take the next set of steps, that Africa will, out-accelerate what's happening in Mexico and in Chile. Now, that being said, I think at least what I see in Mexico and Chile is moving along quite fast, but doesn't mean that, it's hard to tell where the opportunity would be there. I wish I knew more about Africa, to tell you the truth, at the end of the day.
What about Russia?
Russia, I have never done business there either. I did hire I met through Craigslist a developer who is based out of Moscow, and he actually helped me build one of the software platforms that I actually went off and started a company around. And I was really impressed with the technical ability that guy had. He could actually speak code. It just was weird that he was so productive. That being said, I've never done business there, and the biggest concern would be, what's the regulatory environment like, right? And how can you actually protect yourself? In my case, it was me and this guy named Max, and we're just, I sent dollars that way, he sent code this way. It was a beautiful thing. And the really weird thing about that is, in the 2 years that I was working with him, I only heard his voice once. And so you can create high trust connections. I mean, he was sending me lines and lines of code, and I actually spent tens of thousands of dollars. You can create trust relationships across that. Same thing about Ukraine. A different culture again than Russia, different style of engineering, but same thing.
So to follow up on that question a little bit, have you had any experiences with corruption? That's one big problem that I have. I study both China and Russia, and it's a big problem in both of those cultures.
So in business environment, I think that there's been times that there might have been an expectation that I was actually supposed to do something, but American laws are actually pretty clear. We're held to this American standard of you don't pay bribes, you don't do all that sort of stuff. And at the level that I've operated up until this point, I've always kind of acted naive about it. The only time I ever had an issue was with the police in Mexico years ago. And it's like one time I had a guy pull me over. He had an AK-47. And so when he went like this, guess what? I pulled over and he said, "Necesito algo para mi café." I need something for my coffee. I was dating a Mexican woman at the time. And I said, "Él necesita algo para su café." And she was like, this. Una mordida, a little bite. And so I said, "Quizás aquí está 6 pesitos para comprar un poco azúcar para su café. Here's 6 pesos so you can go buy some sugar for your coffee. Sorry, I don't have any in the car." That sort of stuff really irritates the hell out of me. And it does hold that country back, and it holds other countries back. And we have corruption here in this country as well. And so we shouldn't try to be blind to what's happening here as well. It just looks different. But okay, if you have to do it, you have to do it because the guy's got an AK-47. Okay, yes sir. Here's some, some sugar for your coffee.
You haven't heard of any startups being kind of, falling out of the government's favor in China, for instance, and running into endless troubles?
I've heard all sorts of stories. Like you can just read The Economist on a weekly basis, and you'll hear, and not to pick on any one country, because especially if I go there, I want to make sure that corruption comes in all sorts of different types. Corruption in this country is regulation that blocks out competition. Here we are in this, we believe in the marketplace, in a free enterprise in this country, and a lot of times the problem is, well, you can't compete in this marketplace because you're not, you don't have like the certificate yet, right? That's another type of corruption. Or just watch the U.S. Senate for, on C-SPAN for more than a couple hours. And if it doesn't irritate the hell out of you, I don't know what will. Or actually, watch Jon Stewart or something like that, right? So I do think there are ways, though, of bringing all that into the light. And part of what my idea for all these bridges we're building around the world is just to figure out how can we create sunshine. Have you ever heard the idea that sunshine is the best disinfectant? There's this concept that sunshine, the sun is one of the best disinfectants ever. The way you could apply this in your dealings is make sure that, first off, make sure your business can actually take the test of having the sun shine on it. Like, okay, here's my books. Here's my accounting. Here's all my different regulations. Here's my different contracts. You should. One of the things I would suggest is being ready, so that if you have to, or if you want to do it from a defensive standpoint, hey, here's all the information about my company. That's another way to operate. For a specific instance, though, I don't know. I know that part of my policy is just being really transparent. If you read my Twitter, you read my blog, my personal blog, sometimes it's painfully transparent. Some of my friends are like, dude, my hope is that long term, with structures like what's coming out, like some of the platforms that are coming out of, and sorry to just rip on this, but I'll actually just throw out some ideas. Like there's platforms based on top of Bitcoin, like Ethereum as an example, that where the whole blockchain, the whole list of transactions is there in public and anyone can audit it. I think that that's going to be revolutionary. And that'll be the sort of stuff that...
What was that called?
I'm going to say it wrong, but it's based on Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain. It's called Ethereum. Someone say it. I'm a little dyslexic, so I apologize. Ethereum, something like that. I'm a terrible speller, and
Ethereum?
Yeah, but it's stuff like that. It's considered like the fifth wave of the internet, or the fifth wave of the computer technology, where everything's turning into peer-to-peer. And the cool thing about what that could represent, and actually one of you guys should make sure you build a company around this. What it could represent is that a lot of what gets hidden in government, whether in this government, in this world, this country, or somewhere else, will be out in the open. And I'm very hopeful for that. Very hopeful because, anytime there's something like bribes and stuff like that, it's just the tax that slows things down. It's just friction that slows opportunity down. That maybe should, be brought out in the open.
Maybe one more question. A couple more. Go ahead in the back.
My question is kind of similar to his. I'm a senior Korean and Mandarin major, and I'm opening a business in China kind of soon.
Congratulations, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm really concerned about the government. So how easy or how hard has it been, like, working with the government and creating ties, or just having a business at all?
And again, I'm not a Korea or Chinese expert. You're always going to have a risk. I mean, in this country, you have a risk. right? You're going to have a risk from competition, a risk from government, a risk from entrepreneurs. All we do is manage risk. Okay, so one of the first things they do, the day that President Salinas left the government of Mexico in 1994, that one day the peso dropped from it was like $1 to 3 pesos, and it went overnight from $1 to 7 pesos, like overnight. And in that little bit of time, and it's just because it's found out that he actually did some stuff that he shouldn't have done. In that one day, I lost more than $10,000. Now, thankfully, I moved some of my money from pesos back to American dollars, back to my U.S. bank account. He's gonna have to figure it out. And doesn't necessarily mean that the dollar is gonna do better than the peso, right? Doesn't necessarily mean. When I was in Chile, I wish I'd kept my money in Chilean pesos in 2003, because the Chilean peso started kicking the dollar's butt. So there's no way to really know for sure. But some basic things like that. Make a list of all the risk. Decide which ones you're going to ignore, because you're going to go crazy if you don't ignore some of them. And decide which ones you're actually going to try to do something about, and what's your strategy for dealing to mitigate that. And I would focus more on the concrete ones versus the abstract ones. Like abstract ones are, it's possible that a comet's going to come crush into the Earth and destroy not only all of our businesses, but all of our lives, right? Okay, so I'm going to stop worrying about the comet threat. There will be other much more simple things on that list that it's just another risk to deal with inside of the business. And that's what we learn how to do with entrepreneurs, is we actually manage the risk. Good luck with that. That's exciting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. With that, y'all join me in thanking Kevin for his time tonight, and it's fun.
My wish for you guys is that you're all, take the risk, and may you find success in that. And, entrepreneurship can be a pain in the butt, but it's also really rewarding. And once you've actually really tasted it, even if you blow it up the first time or the second time, there's something that you'll never have taken away from you again. It's kind of really weird about that. There's a confidence I now have that I feel really great about, that, if I had to leave the country for whatever reason, that I actually could go do something someplace else. That's actually really empowering in a really weird way. Unless you've experienced it, it's kind of, so best of luck to everyone. Yeah, good luck in China. That's going to be exciting. Cool. Well, thank you all. And I'll mention just real quick, you're all welcome to come to the Tech Ranch. We have something called the Campfire every 2 weeks, or actually twice a month, the second and fourth Friday of the month. It's a free event. It starts at 3:30. 3:30 to 4 is like general networking. 4 to 5 is where we do a teaming event. Like if you're looking for something, you're looking to connect in, you're looking to refine an idea, all that stuff. It's a great way to do that. Then at around 5:15 or something like that, it becomes a happy hour. For those of y'all that are 21 and older, there's like a set of adult beverages over there. For those of y'all that are not, don't touch it. Save that for your college parties. Just kidding.
The Campfire was the first startup event I ever went to in Austin, and it triggered a fantastic chain of events that ended me up here. But
excellent.
I indeed was under 21 and tasted some of the wine.
I'm just saying, I don't know. I don't need to know about any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
but the main thing is,
cut that part out of the tape.
You should definitely take advantage. I mean, feel free to take advantage of it as many times as you want to go, especially if you're looking for something international, but you don't necessarily know what you want to start yourself. A lot of times there'll be entrepreneurs there that'll just say, hey, I'm looking for someone who can read Mandarin. And it could be that you do a little favor for that person with the expectation and the request, hey, help me figure out where I'm going to land in Shenzhen. Something like that.
Fantastic event. It really is.
So, and other than that, I don't know. I'll keep on talking forever. So yeah.
Cool.
Thank you all.